In the 3rd century AD, a prophet named Mani looked at the world and saw 4 great powers: Rome, Persia, China, and a kingdom most people today have never heard of, Aksum. Aksum, in the highlands of modern Ethiopia and Eritrea, an African empire that minted its own gold currency, built towering stone obelisks, and traded with Rome, Persia, and India on equal terms. It was the first African state to issue its own coinage, the only ancient African currency ever struck in gold, silver, and bronze. And for 6 centuries, it was the hinge of the Indian Ocean economy. This is the story of how Aksum got rich and how it lost everything when the trade route shifted. I'm your host, and this is Empires and Economics. To understand Aksum's wealth, you have to understand its geography. The kingdom sat on a plateau in the Horn of Africa, with a coastline on the Red Sea, and at the bottom of that coastline was a port called Adulis. Adulis was the hinge of the ancient Indian Ocean trade. Every ship moving between the Roman world and India had to pass through the Red Sea, and Adulis was the great emporium where east met west. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st century Greek sailing manual, describes Adulis in detail. It tells us the port exported ivory, tortoiseshell, rhinoceros horn, obsidian, and gold. It imported textiles, glass, wine, olive oil, and copper from the Roman world, and spices, cotton, and silk from India. The same document mentions a king named Xosceles, who ruled the region. The author describes him as a miserly man with a covetous disposition, but also as someone who read and wrote Greek fluently. Even then the Greeks knew, to trade with the East, you had to deal with Aksum. But the real engine of Aksum's economy wasn't gold, it was ivory. The African interior was full of elephants, and the ancient world had an insatiable appetite for their tusks. Ivory was used for furniture, jewelry, religious carvings, and the thrones of kings. In Rome, a single large tusk could sell for more than a year's wages. Aksum controlled the trade routes from the interior to the coast. The elephants were hunted in the savannas beyond the highlands, and the tusks were carried down to Adulis, where Roman and Arabian merchants paid premium prices. The Periplus tells us that Adulis exported a great quantity of ivory, so much that the port was known across the Indian Ocean. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder complained that the demand for ivory was emptying Africa of its elephants. Much of that ivory passed through Aksumite hands. And ivory wasn't the only export. The kingdom also sold gold from the southern highlands, emeralds, obsidian, animal hides, and the aromatic resins of the horn, frankincense, and myrrh, worth their weight in silver. The profits from this trade built a city that astonished visitors. The capital, also called Aksum, was a metropolis of stone palaces, grand plazas, and the famous obelisks, single pieces of granite, some over 20 meters tall, carved to look like multi-story buildings. These stelae were the tombs of kings. Raising a 20-meter obelisk required hundreds of workers, sophisticated engineering, and enormous wealth. The Aksumites didn't just have money, they had enough surplus to spend it on monuments that would outlast their empire. The kingdom also developed its own agriculture. The highlands were fertile, growing wheat, barley, and teff, a grain still eaten in Ethiopia today. Aksum was one of the few ancient states that was both a major agricultural producer and a major trading power. Around the year 270 AD, a king named Endubis did something no African ruler had ever done. He minted coins, gold, silver, bronze, struck in the name of the king, with his portrait and profile in Greek inscriptions, the international language of trade. Why Greek? Because Aksum's coins were designed for the international market. The Roman Empire's currency was the standard of the Mediterranean. The Kushan Empire's coins were the standard of the Indian Ocean. Aksum's coins were modeled on both, familiar enough to be accepted, distinct enough to be recognized. The gold coin was based on the Roman aureus, weighing about 2.5 grams. The silver and bronze coins were for local and regional trade. Together they made Aksum the first African state with a full coinage system. This was a statement of sovereignty. In the ancient world, the right to mint coins was a privilege of independent power. By striking his own money, Endubis was telling Rome, Persia, and India, "We are your equals." The coins were more than propaganda, they were a working currency. Aksumite gold coins have been found as far away as India and Arabia, proof that they were accepted in international trade. The silver and bronze coins circulated locally, paying for grain, livestock, and labor. The coinage also tells us the story of Aksum's religion. The earliest coins carry the disc and crescent, symbols of the old gods. Then, in the 330s, King Ezana converted to Christianity, and the coins changed overnight. The disc and crescent disappeared. In their place appeared the cross. Aksum became one of the first states in history to put the Christian symbol on its money, decades before the Roman Empire did the same. For the next 3 centuries, every Aksumite king minted coins in his own name. It was a continuous monetary tradition that lasted longer than the Roman Empire's own gold coinage. Aksum's wealth bought more than monuments. It bought influence. The Red Sea in late antiquity was a contested corridor. Rome and later Byzantium wanted the Indian Ocean trade. Persia wanted it too, and both needed allies on the African coast. Aksum played them against each other beautifully. The Roman Emperor Constantius II sent an embassy to Aksum in the 350s, trying to persuade King Azana to abandon Christianity for Arianism. The embassy failed, but the fact that Rome sent it shows how much Aksum mattered. 2 centuries later, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian asked Aksum to invade the kingdom of Himyar in Arabia, to protect Christians there and to break Persian influence in the region. Aksum did invade. King Caleb crossed the Red Sea with an army and conquered Himyar in the 520s. For a time, Aksum controlled both sides of the Red Sea. It was the dominant power of the region, a naval and commercial empire that could project force across the water. The diplomatic gifts flowed both ways. Byzantine emperors sent Aksumite kings gifts of gold, silk, and precious objects. Aksumite kings sent ivory, gold, and exotic animals. These were not just courtesies, they were the grease of international commerce, the way states signaled that trade routes would stay open. The 6th century traveler Cosmas Indicopleustes visited Adulis and described a thriving port. He copied down a famous inscription, the Monumentum Adulitanum, a Greek text carved on a stone throne, describing the campaigns of an Aksumite king who conquered lands from the Nile to Arabia. Cosmas also described the trade itself. Aksumite merchants traveled to Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka, to buy silk and spices. They brought back goods that were then re-exported to the Roman world. Aksum was the middleman of the Indian Ocean, and middlemen, as every economist knows, take a cut of every transaction. The kingdom's merchants were so active that Aksumite communities are mentioned in the trade records of Arabia and India. The empire wasn't just a producer, it was a trader, a shipper, and a financier of the ancient global economy. And then, in the 7th century, the world changed. The rise of Islam transformed the Indian Ocean. The new caliphate controlled Arabia, Egypt, and the eastern Mediterranean. Trade routes shifted. Instead of passing through the Red Sea, much of the commerce between East and West now went through the Persian Gulf to Baghdad and the new Islamic cities. The Red Sea became a backwater. Adulis, the great emporium, was sacked and abandoned. The ships stopped coming. The ivory trade, the gold trade, the spice trade, all of it dried up. Aksum's economy had been built on one thing, its position at the crossroads of the Indian Ocean. When the crossroads moved, the empire had nothing left. The kingdom retreated to the highlands, cut off from the sea. The capital was abandoned. The great obelisks stood silent. By the 10th century, the Aksumite state had effectively ceased to exist, its legacy carried on by successor kingdoms in the Ethiopian highlands. The story of Aksum is a lesson in the economics of location. Aksum didn't invent the trade routes. It didn't create the demand for ivory or gold. It simply sat at the right place, the hinge between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, and built an empire on the tolls, the markups, and the diplomacy that position allowed. It was the first African state to mint its own money, and one of the first states anywhere to put the cross on its coins. Its gold circulated from Arabia to India. Its kings corresponded with the emperors of Rome and Byzantium as equals, but location is a fragile asset. When the trade routes shifted, the wealth went with them. The obelisks remained, and they still stand today in the city of Aksum in northern Ethiopia, a monument to the African empire that minted its own money and traded with the world. The richest empires aren't the ones with the most gold. They're the ones that sit at the crossroads and know what to do when the crossroads move.